The rifle was already packed when Sergeant Dolan called her in. She had been at the range for 4 hours. Not the range the unit used for qualification. The private strip of gravel and scrub brush north of the base that she had found in her first week and returned to every morning since, before the mess hall opened, before the vehicles warmed up, before anyone thought to look for her. The distances she was shooting at were not in any manual the base kept on file. Lena Holt knew this. She had calculated them herself. Dolan's runner caught her walking back toward the barracks with the case over one shoulder and a notebook in her hand. 3 pages of wind correction data and atmospheric adjustment figures filled in a script so small it looked like print. The runner was 19 and had been told to find the new specialist and bring her to the sergeant's office. He had expected someone easier to identify. The woman he found looked like she had been working alone for a long time and had gotten comfortable with it. She followed him without asking why. Dolan's office was a repurposed storage room that still smelled faintly of motor oil and old rubber, and he was standing behind his desk with a folder open when she came in. He did not offer her a chair. She did not look for one. "Specialist Holt," he said. He was reading something and had not looked up yet, which told her he was not sure how to start. Men who were sure how to start looked up first. "Sergeant." He closed the folder. He looked at her then. The rifle case, the notebook, the fact that she was not breathing hard, despite having apparently come from somewhere that required a 10-minute walk. "You've been here 6 weeks." "Yes. Your qualification scores are on file." "I know." He set the folder down and pushed it toward her slightly, which was not an invitation to take it but was the kind of gesture men made when they wanted to establish that they controlled the information in the room. Lena had seen it many times. She waited. "Your scores are the highest this unit has ever recorded," he said. "For any position, any caliber, any distance. The wind out here is consistent," she said. "Once you map it, the corrections become straightforward." Dolan looked at her for a long moment. He was trying to decide if she was being modest or clinical, and the answer was that she was being neither. She was being accurate, which was something different and something he did not quite have a category for. "There's a joint exercise starting Thursday," he said. "Northern Corridor. Mixed unit, us. 2 infantry sections from Petawawa, a reconnaissance team from Valcartier. The scenario involves simulated long-range interdiction of a mobile command structure across variable terrain." He paused. "The position assigned to this unit is the Overwatch role." "I understand." "Corporal Brannigan was supposed to run it." She waited. "Brannigan's knee is not going to be ready." She waited again. He looked at her like he was hoping she would say something that would make the next part easier. She did not say anything, because she had learned that silence almost always produced more honest information than a question would. "The exercise coordinator from Petawawa is a captain named Ashford," Dolan said finally. "He has opinions about how the Overwatch position should be operated. Specific opinions. About distance, about angle of approach, about what kind of shooter should be in that role." Lena understood what he was not saying. She had understood it before he opened his mouth. "I'll be ready Thursday," she said. Dolan nodded once. He picked up his folder again. She was dismissed. She walked back to the barracks and sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark for a few minutes, not because she was uncertain about anything, but because she liked to take the shape of a situation before it started moving. The situation was familiar, a joint exercise, a captain from another unit who had come with his own map of how things should go and where certain people should and should not be. A sergeant who believed the numbers on the qualification sheet but was not sure the numbers were the whole story. And Lena Holt, who was used to being the part of the story people had not read yet. She opened her notebook to a clean page and began calculating the terrain variables for the Northern Corridor from memory. The morning of the exercise was cold in the way that late autumn mornings in that part of Ontario are cold. Not brutal, but definite. A cold that meant business without making a speech about it. The joint unit assembled at 0600 in a cleared area near the tree line, and Lena arrived with her kit and her notebook and took a position near the equipment staging area where she could hear the briefing without standing at the front of the group. Captain Ashford was already speaking when she arrived. He was a large man who carried his rank the way some men carried keys, visibly deliberately, so that everyone around him was aware of it at all times. He was walking through the exercise parameters with a laser pointer and a projected map, and he spoke with the fluency of someone who had given this particular briefing, or one very like it, enough times to have stopped actually thinking about it. The Overwatch position was marked on his map with a green indicator. It was placed at approximately 800 meters from the primary target corridor on a ridge with moderate elevation and clear sightlines. It was a solid position. It was also, Lena noted, 240 meters short of where she would have placed it given the terrain, the wind patterns she had been mapping since Tuesday, and the fact that the mobile command structure in the scenario would have a predictable blind spot at 1100 meters that Ashford's placement would completely miss. She wrote this down. She did not say anything. The unit moved out at ZO 700. The infantry sections from Petawawa spread wide into the tree corridor, and the reconnaissance team from Valcartier angled north toward the elevated ground. Dolan's unit, with Lena at the Overwatch position, moved along the eastern margin where the scrub thinned out and the sight lines opened up. Ashford fell in beside Dolan near the midpoint of the movement, and Lena, walking 15 meters behind with Corporal Yates and a signals technician named Finn, could hear the conversation without straining. "Your Overwatch shooter," Ashford said. It was not quite a question. "Specialist Holt," Dolan said. A pause. "The qualification scores." "Yes." Another pause longer. "Qualification scores are a controlled environment. Single variable, known distance, known conditions, known target presentation." "I understand that, sir. What I'm saying is that what we're doing today involves layered variables. Wind, elevation change, a moving target structure, communications lag between Overwatch and the forward elements. This isn't a range exercise." "I understand that, sir," Dolan said again, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man who understood something perfectly well and had chosen, for the moment, to say nothing more about it. Lena wrote a wind correction in her notebook. She was watching the tree line to the northeast and the way the dry grass at the margin moved, and she was calculating. She had been calculating since Tuesday. She had, at this point, been calculating for most of her adult life. The Overwatch position came into view at 0-8 the ridge at 800 meters, the placement that Ashford had marked on his map. Lena looked at it. She looked at the terrain to the northeast. She looked at her notebook. "Sergeant Dolan," she said. He looked back at her. So did Ashford. "The position on the map places us at 800, she said. "The mobile command structure, based on the scenario parameters and the terrain model, will approach the target corridor through a narrow channel that opens at 1100 meters. At 800, the ridge puts us at a 14-degree angle to that channel. We'll have a window of approximately 4 seconds of viable target presentation before the structure passes into the dead ground behind the secondary rise." Ashford turned around fully. His expression was the expression of a man who has just heard a corporal explain something to him and is not yet sure whether to be annoyed or confused, and is leaning toward annoyed. "At 1100, Lena continued, from the secondary position, she pointed northeast to a feature that was not on Ashford's map but was on hers, a low shelf of granite that broke the scrub line at a place she had identified on Tuesday from the aerial survey data she had requisitioned and apparently been the only one to read. The angle becomes 2 degrees. Target presentation window is 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The channel narrows again after that." Nobody said anything. "The wind here runs northwest at approximately 12 to 15 kilometers in the morning, dropping to 8 or 9 by midday. At 1100 meters, that requires a correction of approximately 1.3 milliradians left, adjustable as the wind drops. I have the chart." She held up the notebook. Ashford looked at the notebook. He looked at the granite shelf to the northeast. He looked at Dolan. Dolan said nothing. He was good at that. "You requisitioned aerial survey data," Ashford said slowly to Lena. "Yes. For a joint training exercise, I wanted to understand the terrain." He was quiet for a moment. He was a man who was recalibrating, which was not something he was accustomed to doing in front of people, and it showed not as weakness exactly, but as a kind of friction, a gear catching. He looked at the map on his display again. He looked at the granite shelf. "Sergeant Dolan," he said. "Sir." Have your specialist take us to the secondary position. It was not a concession. Ashford was experienced enough to know that reframing a correction as a command was not a concession. It was leadership of a sort, the ability to integrate new information without losing the thread of authority. Lena respected this. She gathered her kit and moved northeast. The secondary position was better than her calculations had suggested it would be, which was unusual. Usually the reality of terrain was slightly worse than the model. Small irregularities, ground that didn't drain the way the survey said it would, scrub that blocked lines the aerial data showed as clear. But the granite shelf was solid and flat, and faced exactly the direction her data said it would. And when she set up and looked through the scope at the target corridor, the channel was precisely where she had said it would be, and the dead ground that would have swallowed the target from Ashford's position was fully visible from here. Finn set up communications behind her. Yates found a natural depression in the granite that served as cover and settled in without being asked. The reconnaissance team from Valcartier came up on the radio and confirmed their position and one of their number. A warrant officer with a Quebec accent who identified himself as Renault asked with some precision who had selected the secondary position and on what basis. Dolan told him. There was a brief silence on the radio, and then Renault said something in French that Lena did not catch, and then switched back to English and said, "Understood. Good position." The exercise ran for 6 hours. The mobile command structure appeared in the target corridor at 11:43, 2 minutes ahead of the scenario schedule, which was a variable Ashford had not anticipated, but which fell within the range. Lena's timing model had assigned a 22% probability. She made one wind correction at 11:47 as the morning breeze dropped below 8 kilometers. She made no other adjustments. When the exercise ended and the unit reassembled at the staging area, the debrief was conducted by the exercise coordinator from Petawawa with all unit leaders present. Lena stood at the back and listened. The assessment of the overwatch component noted the deviation from the planned position and assessed the outcome of the secondary placement as, in the coordinator's words, significantly superior to the baseline scenario in terms of both target acquisition window and engagement geometry. Ashford did not look at her during this portion of the debrief. He looked at the ground, at his notes, at the display screen. He was doing the internal accounting that people do when a situation has not gone the way they understood it, and they are deciding how to carry that going forward. At the end of the debrief, when the unit leaders were dispersing and the infantry sections were loading kit into the vehicles, Renault from Valcartier walked across the staging area toward Lena. He was a compact man, mid-40s, with a stillness about him that she recognized as the stillness of someone who spent a lot of time in elevated positions, watching things happen at great distances. "The chart in your notebook," he said. "The wind model. Yes, you built it from the survey data and 4 mornings of observation." He looked at her steadily for a moment. "How long have you been doing this?" It was a simple question. She considered the simple answer, which was that she had been doing it formally for 3 years, and informally for considerably longer, since the summer she was 14 and discovered, at a competition range in Manitoba, that she could calculate bullet drop across variable wind conditions faster and more accurately than the adults around her, and that this fact made some of those adults uncomfortable, and that their discomfort was not her responsibility. "Long enough," she said. Renault nodded. He handed her a card. It had a phone number and the crest of his unit and nothing else. "There's a selection process," he said. "Starts in February if you're interested." She looked at the card. She put it in her notebook between the wind correction charts. She did not call in February. She called in January because she had already done the calculations and she knew that 2 months of preparation would be optimal and that waiting until February to initiate contact would cost her exactly 18 days that she could not afford to waste. The selection was in Petawawa, 4 weeks, and at the end of the first week, 3 of the 11 candidates had withdrawn, and 1 had been medically removed, and Lena had said perhaps 40 words in 5 days, most of them to the range officer or to the navigation instructor who ran the land movement assessments. She was not unfriendly. She was focused, which some people read as unfriendly, because they were not used to the distinction. On day 9, Ashford arrived for an observer visit. He stood at the margin of the range facility with 2 other officers and watched the morning session. Lena was at position 3,100 meters, crosswind condition, target moving at a preset lateral speed. She ran through the calculation, the one she had been running variations of since she was 14, that had become by now a kind of internal language. Something that happened faster than deliberate thought and left behind only the answer. And she fired, and the target registered, and she reloaded, and the target was repositioned, and she fired again. She heard one of the officers say something she could not make out. She heard Ashford's response clearly, because the wind had dropped and the range was quiet. I had her on an exercise in October. 800-meter placement, standard parameters. A pause. She put herself at 1100 and briefed it from a notebook. Another officer said something. I know, Ashford said. That's why I'm here. She did not react. She fired again, and the target registered, and she wrote the conditions in her notebook because the conditions were always worth writing down, even when everything had gone exactly as calculated. The selection ended on a Thursday. She was informed of the outcome by a senior warrant officer who came to the candidate accommodations at 0730 and handed her a sealed folder without preamble. She opened it and read it and set it on the desk. Of the 11 candidates, 4 had completed the selection. She had the highest composite assessment score. The specific note at the bottom of the assessment, written in the particular clipped language of evaluation reports, said, "Candidate demonstrates exceptional technical precision and operational judgment. Anticipates variables at range. Spatial and mathematical reasoning. Assessed at highest observed level for this position." She folded the paper and put it in her notebook, on top of the wind correction charts and above Renaud's card. She had known since October, since the moment on the granite shelf when the channel appeared in her scope, exactly where she had calculated it would be. And Finn had said good call, and Yates had said nothing, and the radio had crackled, and Renaud's voice had said good position in that particular way, which was not the way people described luck, but the way they described something they recognized. She had known and she had calculated the timeline, and she had called in January, and she had been right. She zipped the notebook into her pack. She went to breakfast. Outside the mess hall, the February morning was doing what February mornings in Ontario do. Gray and definite, a cold that had settled in and was not in a hurry. She stood with her coffee for a moment before going in, looking at the tree line in the sky and the particular quality of the light that told her the wind would pick up by mid-morning and shift northwest. She filed it away. She would need it later, or she would not. But either way, it was information, and information was the only thing that had ever let her down when she failed to collect it in time. She went inside. At the table near the window, Renaud was already eating. He looked up when she came in and looked at her face for a moment and then looked back at his tray. "February," he said. "January," she said. He smiled barely into his coffee. "Right." She set her tray down across from him and sat, and outside the mess hall, the wind came off the tree line exactly as she had predicted, and the cold morning moved forward the way cold mornings do, without ceremony, without announcement, 1 calculated degree at a time.